heard about sourdough and you're not sure what it is or how to get started, this is the perfect video for you. I too once had no clue what I was doing, but once you get started, you'll get the hang of it and soon you'll have some delicious bread for your home and family. Here is sourdough starter. This is what you will need to make your bread. I got some from a friend who had been feeding his for a couple years. Some people have had their starters going for 10 years or more. You can also start fresh and make your new batch, which can take about a week or so. Sourdough prefers glass or ceramic. You don't want to keep your sourdough in plastic. Some people put a cloth with a rubber band. Here you can see my starter is nice and bubbly, ready to go, ready for baking. If you are asking a friend for starter, I would ask for at least a cup or two. Then when you get home, feeding it a half cup flour and a half cup room temperature water, letting it sit out covered. So I place this rubber band here so that when it is rising, I can see how much it has risen. So we want it to rise, we want it to be bubbly. That's when the starter is active and ready to be used. If your starter has risen and it's sitting out too long, it will go back down and you might see the line where it went up to and went back down, and that means it's flat and it's not active. But this still can be used as discard. There are a lot of recipes such as discard pancakes. You can also just discard some into your compost, maybe about a fourth to half cup, and then refeed it and let it rise again. Depending on the temperature of your home, it will rise faster or slower. Our home stays pretty warm because we have the wood stove. So it might take me 4 to 6 hours before I can use this for a recipe. Thus, with my schedule, I wake up around 7 a.m., take it out of the refrigerator, feed it, and let it sit out over near the wood stove. Then around 10, 11 o'clock, I can get ready with my recipe. So if you are using sourdough every day, you can just leave it out every day on the counter, feeding it once a day. The less you feed it and the longer you keep it out, the more sour it will get. You can smell it and taste it to see how sour it's gotten. Discarding some and replenishing it will help keep your sourdough healthy, and thus you will have a healthy gut. My husband and I noticed immediately a difference in our digestion and elimination once we started switching to sourdough bread. We love bread, and thus when we eat sourdough, we don't feel that guilty, and we know it's homemade, it's healthy, and we can be nourished. You can use basic white flour and still have the health benefits. I would aim for organic flour, non-GMO flour. There is a lot of pesticides and chemicals in our crops out there, and we in turn are getting these as we eat. I like to mix my breads with a little bit of whole wheat or rye flour, sometimes seeds, or I'll make different types of bread that include milk and butter and are a little richer. After my starter has risen and I start making my dough around 10 o'clock in the morning, I'll make it, let it sit. I will do my stretch and fold and let it sit for its bulk rise, which would be about 6 to 10 hours depending on the temperature of your home. So hopefully for me, I'm ready about 4 or 5 o'clock. My dough has risen, doubled in size about, and I'm ready to shape the dough and have it sit for its second rise. And then at night, around 9, 10 o'clock at night, I'm putting it into the fridge and letting it proof overnight. And in the morning, I can turn the oven on, score the bread, place it in, and we have warm bread for breakfast. That is my timing. The timing may work out differently for you. You may prefer at night to make your dough, let it sit all night long, and in the morning, shape it, let it do its second rise, and then baking it for the afternoon or evening. There can be a point where the dough rises too much. If you don't wake up early enough, your dough might overrise and then come back flattened down and won't be as crummy like you want it to be, which is having those holes in that bread. There are several different shapes you can make for the dough. You can make the boule, you can make the baguettes, you can make the loaf. So today we're going to get started with a basic sourdough white flour dough. Here we go. Measure out 50 grams of sourdough starter. That's about a half cup of starter. It's okay to go a little bit beyond that half cup. Pour 350 grams of room temperature water, that's about 1 cup and 1/3. Have your dough whisk out and stir the wet ingredients, then adding the dry. 500 grams of white flour, that's about 4 cups. I like to stir as I pour in my flour, stirring until the flour is completely incorporated. You can add the salt now, or you can add it on top after you've mixed it all together. With sourdough, you do not need to use instant yeast. The sourdough is what is the rising agent here. It's alive. It absorbs the energy in your house, in your home. If your home does not get warm or you don't like it warm, you can place your dough or your sourdough starter when you want it to rise inside the oven with the light on, and this will help give it some contained heat. I love getting the kiddos involved in the kitchen, even though it brings a lot more mess. Even though it brings more mess now, they will become better educated around the kitchen and be more independent when it's time for them to make their own food. So putting in the work now, and hopefully later on I will reap what I sow. Stay hydrated, y'all. I enjoy using my hands to mix. I like to feel the dough. If the dough seems a little too dry, I might wet my hands. If it feels too wet, I'll flour my hands, and this will prevent them from getting super sticky. Once all the flour is incorporated, I'll cover with a tea towel and let it sit for 30 minutes to an hour. This is a good time to refeed my sourdough starter. I'll put about a half cup of flour and a half cup of room temperature water. Again, stirring until incorporated. If I think I'll use it the next day, I'll leave it out on the counter. If not, I'll put it away in the fridge covered, but make sure not to forget about it. Even if you're not using your starter weekly, it's a good idea to feed it, replenish it weekly. Maximum time away from it might be 2 to 3 weeks. After feeding my starter, I will let it rise for a couple hours before putting it away in the fridge. You don't have to do this. You can put it right in the fridge. But know that if you're planning to bake the next day, you might want to take the starter out at night, feed it, and let it rise overnight. Otherwise, your starter may not be ready in time, for it may need longer to warm up and rise to get bubbly. After letting the dough sit for half hour to an hour, you perform your stretch and fold about 8 to 10 times. Here I found the dough was a little too dry, so I added some water. You'll grab the bottom of the dough, pull up as high as you can, and fold over, pressing down on the dough. I usually do this in a circle for about 8 to 10 times. This will look different with a wetter dough. The dough has doubled and is ready to be shaped. I'll flour my surface down and pat my hands, scraping the dough out with my hands and then getting all the dough covered with flour. Since I doubled the recipe, I'll be using the bench scraper to cut it in half. If you have 2 smaller pans, then you can cut it in half and make 2 smaller loaves. This will reduce your cooking time, checking for the top to be golden brown and checking the internal temperature. Here I'm folding the dough under 2 times, pressing a little bit and then folding again, curling the seam underneath and tucking it under. You can use your bench scraper to do this, or you can use your hands. Placing it into your pan with a parchment paper. Sourdough is very sticky, and if you don't use parchment paper, even if you've buttered up your pan, it still can stick and be hard to get out. After shaping the dough and letting it do its second rise, I will be proofing it in the fridge overnight. You don't have to do this, but it is much easier to work with a cold dough. You'll need to score the dough to allow the gas that has built up to be released. This is much easier on a cold dough, plus the sourdough flavor will be enhanced because of the longer fermentation. I also love bench scrapers because they clean up super well. They can scrape off any hard, sticky stuff on your counters. So now covering the dough, allowing it to sit, and then rinsing my sourdough bowl in warm soapy water to soak. And now somehow we'll manage to get these hyped up kids to bed. See you in the morning. Preheat the oven at 450 degrees Fahrenheit. Take your loaves out of the fridge. Once the oven is preheated, score your bread using a sharp bread lame or razor. You can do different designs you like. You can do one simple slash through the middle. This will allow the gases that have built up during the fermentation process to be released during the baking. You want your bread lame at a 45-degree angle. To get that nice golden crust, I'm going to place a tray of ice underneath. This will create steam in the oven. 30 to 35 minutes later, I see beautiful golden crust. Taking out the loaves and checking the internal temperature to be around 200 to 210 degrees Fahrenheit. And now the hardest part, waiting almost an hour for it to cool. The bread is still cooking internally and will be much easier to cut. You may need to cut thick slices when first cutting. If you wait a day, you'll be able to cut thinner slices, sometimes turning your loaf or boule to the side and cutting from that angle. There's that crumb we're looking for. This is a beautiful loaf. This morning, I'll be having it with some grass-fed butter, farm fresh eggs and cheese, and a pickled olive spread. Four outfits and one apron later. And now for the cleanup. It might seem like a long process, but it's really just changing the pace of your life, slowing down a bit, something we can all use. And when you've put that much work and effort towards something, you can really taste the difference. Thank you all so much for watching. I wish you all the best on your sourdough journey. More health and nourishment to you. And check out my other recipes. Check out my homemaking videos and videos on birth, pregnancy, and raising little ones.